In today's episode of Higher Learning, we speak with Kelly Tucker, who is the founder and managing director of HR consultancy HR Star. Kelly's based out of the UK and had a really circuitous route to how she got to where she's at, but she has so much to share in terms of why HR is such an important function in your organization, how to make sure that you're bringing in the best talent, and why taking care of your employees is great for your bottom line. Not to mention, we talk about one of the highest performing LinkedIn posts ever when we asked Kelly about why she got so much engagement. I cannot wait for you to hear this episode and have a listen. Welcome to another episode of Higher Learning. I am your host, Rashid. Today, we have a very special guest all the way from the UK. Today, we have Kelly Tucker, who is the founder and managing director of HR Star. Kelly, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing great. I'm so excited about this. It's been a long time coming. We have so many things that we see the world the same as. We've gotten in kind of similar professional realms. So I am just excited to dive into this. I have done a little bit of research around HR Star and why you went and you founded this company, but I want to give you the forum here to be able to talk about it. So you're the founder of HR Star. I want to know, usually when it comes to being an entrepreneur, there's a gap, right, that you want to try to help address and fix. And so I'm just interested, tell us about HR Star and what kind of that gap was that you're hoping to address.
Sure. So HR Star, we're a HR consultancy, and we partner with organizations, businesses. They tend to be entrepreneurial led, who really want to look after their people because they really do see that link between investing in their people, making sure their people are engaged, happy, motivated with the success of their business. So I've worked in HR now for over 20 years. I started at the bottom of the ranks, if you like, as a HR administrator, kind of fell into that role as a temp role. I took the job and stayed with the first business that I worked in for 8 years. And during that time, I worked my way up into a HR manager and left there then to go and work for another organization to set up their HR function. Stayed there for about 8 years as well. And when I was there, I was working as strategic head of HR. So there's probably, I think the organization had about 50, 60 people, and I was sat on the senior management team. So outwardly, that looked fantastic. HR had a seat at the table. It had a voice. It was there, championing the people. But actually what was happening in reality, when the business were making decisions that impacted the people, 90% of those times, those decisions were being made without HR there, and I was being informed afterwards. And oh, by the way, Kelly, we're going to restructure and we need you to roll that out here. And oh, we've just, changed the policy. Can you go and implement that over there? And I just started becoming more and more frustrated because I was like, well, hang on, I need to be in those conversations beforehand because I did have an ear to the ground. I was very much, working with the people. And it just became frustrating. And then when I was doing my CIPD, which is the qualification you do in the UK when you work in HR, I did my big management research support on the psychological contract and the importance of that in the workplace. So that sort of understanding that it's a two-way relationship when you're at work. If you look after your people and treat them well, they will reciprocate that and do well for you. And that just really sort of piqued my interest. It's like, yeah, this makes perfect sense. We should be being more proactive in how we look after our people. And so that's really what started HR Star. I wanted to go out there and do HR differently. And I know everyone says, oh, we do things differently, but I genuinely know that we do things differently at HR Star. So for instance, although we're a consultancy, I never use the term outsourced because I think it feels like people then put their sort of HR over there to us and we sit over there and we wait, until there's a problem. We're their partner in sort of delivering that people and that HR support. So we've become really immersed in the business, and we look at everything in their business at each point of that employee life cycle to ensure that they are attracting and then retaining the best people. So, how are you hiring? What recruitment methods are you using? Are you using your company values when you go through selection processes and interview, etc.? And then what do you do when you've made that job offer? What are those moments that matter to people when they're coming into a new role, to make sure that induction onboarding piece is like really, really good, so that each point of that employee life cycle, you're creating a great place to work. Because once you do that, you will reap the rewards as a business owner. You will see engaged, motivated people who go above and beyond, who really deliver because they feel cared for and they feel that they've got a vested interest in the company doing well. They feel rewarded and recognized. And for me, it just makes perfect sense. Look after your people, they will look after you.
Totally agree. And it's just, this is an area that I'm passionate about. We came up, around probably a similar time. I remember thinking back to 2007, 2008 when I first got into executive recruiting and then eventually was working at kind of an HR consultancy myself. And one of the things that really stood out to me at the time, and we've made a lot of progress since then, but really was that, if you looked at, I always say, look at the reporting structure of an organization. We work with a lot of Fortune 500, Global 1000 type companies. And I was amazed at how many would have HR reporting up into a chief administrative officer or into a chief financial officer. What are they telling you when they're doing that, right? They're saying that this is a cost center that we need to make sure that we manage from a cost perspective, almost treating it like a necessary evil. Where, in my opinion, like you said, taking care of people is a great long-term business strategy. We're only starting to put financials and bottom line impact around that to show people that. But that was something that 15, 20 years ago when I first got into this space, it was not common thought. And it's still somewhat taking a long time to evolve. So that's one aspect of it. And I'm so glad that you're doing that work, on that side of the pond. And I've been trying to do that same work here and help evangelize to people how this is not just the right thing to do. This is not just something so that you feel good when you go to bed at night that you're a good person and you can pat yourself on the back. This is the right thing to do to grow your business in a sustainable and holistic way that has impact over the long term. So I know we're aligned there. I think the other thing is I love that you work with a lot of entrepreneurs and founders, because what I've also seen, and I've seen some examples here in my own backyard in South Florida, there's been some companies that had meteoric success from a financial perspective, grew. I mean, I'm talking some of these companies are in the billions of dollars, and you could tell that HR wasn't a priority from the get-go. Creating culture wasn't a priority from the get-go. And then they get to a certain point, it's like, oh, we got to fix this, or we got to address this. And by that time, it's almost too late. It's already the dough is baked. It's like you're going to be kind of trying to band-aid things rather than taking it from the beginning and understanding I need to integrate and implement these things from the get-go, and they grow over time, they scale over time, they evolve and iterate over time. So I do want to ask you, working with a lot of founders, do you find that, now there's some that I know the people aspect is really important from the beginning. Those are the best ones to work with. But I have to imagine there's some that at least want to understand, well, what is, is this just fuzzy wuzzy, or is what's the bottom line impact to having a great HR organization? So I'll ask you, what do you do in those scenarios? How do you help try to put some sort of data or numeric value around the impact that a great HR function can have for a company?
Yeah, and it's so interesting. You just mentioned there in terms of, I think historically, HR used to very often sit within the finance function, which is just so frustrating because I think it's a function in itself, and that I think speaks volumes if companies still do that in terms of how and what they see HR as. But yeah, I think we're definitely seeing more and more now, even with our entrepreneurial businesses, data is everything now. People want to see the data. And I love that because, I love being able to show the value that we add. So, it depends on, I suppose, what the focus is. But I think, there's lots of data out there and stats to show, and we're seeing it now within our clients that, if we take our time to understand what people want and need from the workplace and look at engagement scores, how that impacts then on the business bottom line. But also we're seeing a lot now of the use of net promoter score. So when you just ask the simple question to your people, would you recommend HR Star as a great place to work? And then obviously you get detractors, promoters, and that just gives you a score. And the impact that can have. So I think the data is so important, but I think the visibility of how and what businesses do now around their people is so much easier to see and find. And what I mean by that is, I think when I started out in my working career, you're really grateful you went and got a job and you just showed up and you did your job, and that's great. But you look now at people will look at Google reviews, Glassdoor, they'll go on the website, they'll do their research, they'll probably go to meet the team page, or what is it like to work here, and all of those things are really important. And the best talent will be doing their research before they decide whether they're going to apply to work at that company. So I think you need to be able to show the data and the stats of what you do for your people and the impact that has for people who are going to come and work for you, for clients, for your internal teams, and also because I think it holds then the business accountable. So if you're willing to put it out there, like we have a net promoter score of X, you have to maintain that stuff. So I think it really does show then that you're willing to be visible around that, and you actually are invested in doing it because you're shouting about it and it's there for everybody to see.
Yeah, I think that transparency is like a really big key. The fact that the internet has, really democratized information to find out and do research before you go and start at a new company. And maybe that's why the focus has been, I don't want to be cynical about it, but maybe that's why the focus has been so much more pronounced over the last 10 to 15 years because, back in the early 2000s, like it was a little bit of a black box. And like we could say, like maybe the interview process, we do a great job of like, oh, this is a great place to work. You're going to love it here. And then you come and find out that the reality is absolutely something different. That's very hard to pull off now. Now the world is too connected in terms of people sharing information, and you can't make everybody happy all the time, and I think that's an impossible ask, and that's not what any should be trying to do. But overall, if you're doing the right things by people, if you're employee centric, and that message is going to be out there one way or another. And so I think that transparency and the fact that people can make better decisions about where they're going to work more than ever is really, really important and led to a lot of better habits in terms of how people are treating their employees. It sounded like when we were talking earlier, though, that you almost like kind of fell into HR. I'm interested in this story. Was this like, were you going into schooling for it, or was it something you just kind of showed up one day and you're like, all right, I'm going to be an administrative HR, and then you kind of fell in love with it? How did it work?
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely accidental. So went to school, did A level, did A levels in business, English, geography. Always preferred the human element of geography rather than the physical, around population pyramids and all of that kind of stuff. But then when I left school, I traveled a little bit and then I wasn't really sure what to do. So I ended up getting my first job where I was a PA to a senior manager within a really sort of well-known local company where I worked. It was a good employer. So I worked there for a while. And then I left there through redundancy, did a bit more travel. And then I was at the stage where I was like, I really needed to get a job. Not really because I wanted one, but I was still living at home with my parents. And my dad, like every day, was like, Kelly, when you get a job? I was like, yeah, Dad, yes, I will. When I figure out what I'm going to do now, like, Kelly, get a job. I was like, okay. So just to show Will, I kind of signed up to a recruitment agency and was like, got any jobs? And they're like, oh, actually, we've got an administrator job within a HR function for a local charity. And I was like, all right, yeah, I'll go for the interview. Got offered the job there and then. So I was like, right, I better take it, keep my dad happy. It was a 6-month contract. So in my head, I was like, I'm going to go and do that for a few months, earn a bit of money, figure out what I'm going to do longer term, keeps my dad happy. It was local. It was like, fine. And so they were quite a large charity, employed 200 people, but they had HR sat within the finance function and no one really looked after it. So they just brought in a new HR manager to basically do a whole overhaul of the HR function and set it up again from scratch. So it was back in the day when personnel, it was called personnel then, files were paper files in like filing cabinets.
Oh man.
Had to go through every file and make sure they had a contract, like all their offer letters, etc., all paper based. So that was one of the first jobs I had to do. And then they gave me recruitment to look after. And again, this was years ago. So when you had a job that you needed to fill, you put adverts out in the local and sometimes national press. Then people would ring into the HR department and say, can you send me an application form, please? So I'd take their name and address, put these application forms together, send them out, and then collate all the application forms when they came back in, present them to the hiring manager, then set up all the interviews, do the rejects and offer letters, etc. But really manual, like paper-based systems. So I looked after that for probably a year, and I absolutely loved looking after the recruitment.
I was gonna say, I mean, that doesn't sound like a recipe for a lifetime career, but it sounds like those personnel files and that manual posting really stuck with you.
And then just as time went on, I just got more and more involved in the different elements of HR. And then when my line manager left after a couple of 3 years of me being there, they were like, Kelly, do you want to, like, can you just like hold the fort for us while we recruit for another HR manager? I was like, sure. And then they just never recruited another HR manager. After a few months, they're like, do you just want it? And I was like, yeah, sure. So I ended up staying there, like I say, for 8 years.
I love that. And so listen, here's my biggest takeaway from this. We have a lot of early in career talent at my company that listen to this podcast, and I think that there is this false expectation that the really successful people in this world have known what they wanted to do right from the beginning, and they went to school for it, and they applied for jobs, and they got that perfect internship, and never is that path that linear. It sounds like you needed a job because dad was putting some pressure on you, and then you kind of fell into this, and now you're having a very successful career in the HR space. I was in communications and marketing in terms of my college degree. I got a job in technology and then somehow fell into the HR space. And so I would just tell anybody that has anxiety about their future and feeling like they're not ahead of the game because somebody next to them's seems to got it figured out. It's not the case. Some of the most, in fact, the most successful people I know took a very circuitous route to get where they got, and you are no exception, Kelly. So I love that. I wanna ask you about what the ideal HR function looks like at a great company, because we both agree that it's has a seat at the table, right? We agree that it's helping affect, not just policy but also like business objectives, and it's a really strategic function. We know that. Talk to me about what kind of the best HR functions in great companies look like.
Okay. So I think again, like you say, it has a seat at the table. So, in terms of the size, but depending on the size, but that, it's very much there's somebody in the senior leadership team who looks after HR. I think it's really important that the HR function is aligned. So any people plans are aligned to the business plan. So, looking at what is the business trying to achieve? How are we making sure we've got the right people and the right people structures and the right policies in place to enable that to happen? So are we looking at the business goals and feeding those down through to teams and then individuals, so that when individuals are achieving their goals, ultimately the business is achieving its goals? I think you have to be really mindful about what it is that we want from our people. So, people talk about culture all the time, and we know culture is just derived from values and behaviors, but what does that mean? It was very fluffy, wasn't it? When we let's create like a Google like type place to work, and it'd be really cool. But no, we have to think about what does the culture mean and what do we want our culture to be. And I always say this to people in terms of, I think it's very much like, and it has been lost probably a little bit coming out of the pandemic. It's not about, as an employer, just giving your employees everything they want and then they'll do their role. It's not about that. It's two-way. So if you're running a business, and I'm like this at HR Start, it's fast paced. Like we have high workloads. We work at pace. We have to be really agile because we're like obviously like dealing with lots of different clients. So if you're somebody who doesn't want to work in that environment, don't come and work at HR Star, because you've got to be, I think, more transparent about who you are as a business so you find the right people to match. And I think the point you made earlier was like, really important, when people used to sit there and, in job interviews going, oh, we do this here and we do this and we do that. And then they turn up like, oh no, you don't do any of that stuff. So, I think good HR is about being transparent. It's about being honest, about being really clear on what the expectations are. So if you work here, we expect X, Y, Z, but in return, you'll get A, B, C for that. I think it's important to have those policies and structures in place, because however much people want a relaxed way of working or want a cool place to work, people also want structure. People want to know, when do I get paid? What do I do if I need some development? How do I get a pay rise or a promotion around here? What happens when I need to take some holiday? So you still need, even in the coolest, like most relaxed company cultures, you still need some structure. And I then think it's really important that you really always tie that back into that ever evolving employee life cycle. So every point of that, from when we're recruiting, bringing people in, developing them, managing their performance, rewarding them, even exiting them, how are we making sure we're doing that really well and it aligned to who we are as a business and our values? It's so frustrating when you see companies who say, oh, we've got these great company values. Look, they're on a pretty picture on the wall. That's all very well, but what are you doing to actually bring those alive? And I think so, good HR looks like doing all the stuff that was and sometimes still is deemed as fluffy, but actually feeding that into the different processes within the business so that you can show the impact it has on the business achieving its goals.
I love that. I love that. And totally aligned. Let me ask you. So now that we're in this world where it's pretty well understood that there's transparency, we know what are great companies to work for, who the best employers are. There's awards. Our company is actually getting an award this week. One of the best employers in South Florida. We're really excited about that. There's still things that we're constantly working on and iterating on, but that's nice to get the recognition like that. So it's a lot more prevalent, that the understanding of where the great places to work are. Why do you think that there's still, like, we're still in business, you're still in business, right? So it's like, why are there still people that miss how important this human experience is? What do they not get? Do they get too focused on just like the sales model, or they're too focused on the customers and not enough on the employees? And what are leaders missing when they're not investing in this space, when they're not giving it importance, in your mind?
Yeah, because this stuff is hard, right? Making sure your people are happy and motivated and engaged, like continue, because it's not just like a one and done. It's like, oh, my people are engaged, and off I go and do something else. Like, you continually have to be working on that stuff. So I think there's a number of reasons why business still don't do it. I think it's because it's hard and it takes a lot of time and resource to continually stay on top of that. It costs money. Let's be honest here. It does cost money. If you want to be competitive, employer in terms of being, really good, like in terms of how you pay your people and promote your people and look after your people, that stuff does cost money, but you should obviously be able to see an ROI on that anyway. I think maybe there still is a perception that HR is something you wield out when you hire and fire, and it's not really worth putting your time and energy into this stuff. But I think more and more the data is showing us that there is that strong link between business success and looking after your people. So I think there is a number of reasons why they still people don't do it, and I think a lot of it comes down to time and money, and probably just a lack of trust in the process.
And let's be real. It's probably harder now than it's ever been, and it goes back to a lot of the things that we've talked about because there's so much information out there. Because we're in much more of a technology-driven world. The pandemic changed a lot of things in terms of expectations, right, and where we invest as employers. And quite frankly, just younger and early in career talent just have different expectations themselves. In many ways, a very great thing, but it is you're more on, under the bright lights, I would say, to make sure that you are doing the right things. Otherwise, number one, it's going to really impact your business in terms of you're not going to be able to get great talent. You're going to lose the great talent that you have, right? And then the other side of it is that when you treat and this is probably the thing, Richard Branson coined this a long time ago, but by treating your employees really well, your customers feel that, right? Like I know instantaneously when I'm working for, where I'm at a company, I'll give you an example. I went to a hotel this past weekend, had excellent customer service, and you could feel it in every interaction, from the valet to the bellhop to the front desk. The way they made you feel accommodated, that hotel had a great culture within it, and they valued their customers. And so as a customer, I felt happy to be there. Conversely, I've been to some places where even if they're really nice or 5 stars or got a lot of great reviews, you can tell that they don't put that level of importance there, and then you feel that as a customer. So the bottom line impact, to your point, we're only starting to really understand that and put metrics and data around that, but it's very obvious, and especially because information is so much more accessible, it's only going to continue to be more and more heightened. So absolutely love that. We got to talk about hiring because it's an area you're passionate about. I almost want to dive into the manual posting and the locals and the nationals in terms of the application, because I got into recruitment myself a little bit pre-LinkedIn, and I was like actually literally going through like white pages, or like I would call into companies and say, can I speak to your head of marketing? Like, you and I came up in a time where we had to do things a little bit differently, and it's probably informed a lot of the HR leaders that we are now. So let's start here. I want to ask you about when you're bringing people into your organization, or maybe when you're advising a customer, do you have a core philosophy when it comes to hiring?
Yeah, so we're hiring at the moment at HR Star. We're going through a growth stage, which is fantastic. And obviously we help our clients with hiring. And first of all, I think as much as we talk about when we were coming up through the ranks and how we used to have to go through the process. And yes, that was difficult in terms of it was time intensive, etc. But I do think recruiting now is really difficult compared to how easy it has been in the past. So I'll explain that. So when a few years ago, pre-pandemic, and probably a couple of years before that, like you say, there's LinkedIn, there's lots of, we've got loads of recruitment agencies in, the UK who've just set up in business to, find talent for organizations. And, as a business, you used to be able to put a job ad out and you would just get a load of people apply for it. And the hardest bit then was going through the CVs, doing the interview process, but probably 99% of the time you would find someone, you would hire that person. Why I think it's more difficult now is people's expectations have changed in terms of what they want and need from the workplace. What we're seeing in the UK is less good talent is actually looking for roles. They're waiting to be headhunted. So, that's still a relatively new concept here, that, people are in roles really happy until someone knocks on the door and says, oh, I've got this great opportunity. Do you want to come and look at this? And people will. I also think over the years, we've seen a definite shift in terms of people being more open to move roles. I think years ago, you got a job, it was pretty much a job for life, where you thought I had to do X amount of years because it looks good on my CV, and if I job hop, it doesn't look very good. But I don't think we see people minding that so much now. So I think to do recruitment and to do it well, I think it's a balance between giving it the time it needs to go out and source for the right candidates, but with also not taking too long, because that's when you'll lose good talent because people don't wait around as much. I think it's being realistic around what it's like to work at your company and not saying what you think they need to hear to secure the good candidate. I think it's being transparent and open and realistic with, salaries, the responsibilities of the role, etc. And I think the process is about being sort of building that relationship with the candidates from early on. So, in those initial kind of stages where you're doing the screening with them, looking at your interview process is like, how many stages are you going to have? Are you just adding in an extra stage just for the sake of it? Do you actually need 2 stages? Do you actually need a presentation? You're going to do psychometric testing? If so, why and how are you going to use that? And just being more, I think, intentional with how you're recruiting in terms of what you're looking for from that person. If you're hiring based on personality because you work in a small, close-knit team, and so the person is everything, yes, obviously they need to be able to do the role, but if the most important thing is that they're going to get on with your team, that should be the leading sort of part of your recruitment process. If you're in a big, large organization, no, it's actually somebody who's got X amount of experience with this skill, with this tech stack, then that's what you have to focus on through the process. So I think it's also about being adaptable in your process depending on what who you're hiring within the business, at what level, and what you need from it. So I'll always go back to communication, transparency, and honesty, because I think they are just the key things when it comes to recruitment, HR, just being good business people.
Yeah, I mean, listen, one of my favorite sayings is that we make time for what's important. And if we think talent acquisition or your role as a manager is bringing great people into your organization, then you're going to have to put the work in. That's just the bottom line. And so many hiring managers I see, it's either a burden or it's something that they don't want to put a lot of emphasis on, or it's just like, can I outsource this? Can you handle it for me? And the reality of the situation is, to your point, you need to make sure that you have a process that shares your employee value proposition, why you're a great place to work. And you want to be somewhat expedient, but you have to it's like sharpening the saw, right? For 6 hours, if you have 8 hours to cut down a tree, right? I think Abe Lincoln said that. And so that's really what it comes down to. You've got to put in the work up front on the talent acquisition, and then what happens is the process becomes a lot more streamlined and seems quick, and you're able to get that great talent, but it's only because you're giving it the importance and you're putting in the work. And so that's one of the biggest things I do when working with clients. It's like, hey, we'll do everything we can to kind of take this off your plate, and so it's not too much of a burden, so you can focus on the other aspects of your job. But you got to think it's important, and you got to be able to put in the time, and you got to be intentional about it, to your point. Otherwise, you're going to not have the success you have. And we all know, we've all hired people where they change everything for us, right? They change our productivity. They change our company trajectory. They change our team productivity, right? And so it's important. We know the outcome can be great, and it can also be very bad the other way if you don't hire the right person. So that's the type of thing that I find myself talking about a lot, is that we got to make the time, because it's going to be something that if you get it right, can be a real game changer for you and your organization. I got to ask you this. I imagine you have some good stories on interviews, memorable interviews, right? Even like, and you don't have to name names, but like maybe a crazy client situation that you had, or maybe it was something for your own company. Any memorable interviews come to mind when I ask you about that?
God, I've done so many interviews, and yeah, just those from when you have a list of questions and you're asking people the questions, and they're literally like giving you the one word answers. You're like, oh my God, like this is painful, like give something here, to the ones where you ask one question and they're still talking like 30-40 minutes later. You're
Oh
like,
boy, been in
this is
there.
going to be a two-way thing, right?
Yep.
To like people, getting halfway through a screening call going, sorry, what was this job again that I applied for? Because they've just obviously like put out their CV to all over the place. Probably like one of my most memorable was actually in my early career when I was interviewing, and it was a young chap, and we'd probably got 15 minutes in, and he was really struggling to answer the questions, to compose himself, and he literally turned around after about 15 minutes and said, I'm really sorry, I'm only here because my mum made me come, but I actually don't want this job. So I
Oh
was
my
like,
gosh.
okay, in that respect, and then should we just call it a day and we let him go? But I was just like, wow. Yeah, so fortunately, I haven't had any of those types of interviews for a while now, and so, but
That
yeah.
could have been you, though. Your dad wanted you to go take that job. You needed to make sure. You
That's
only thought it was 6 months, but you ended up interviewing okay. It ended up being a lifelong
yeah.
career. So that's amazing. Wow, I love that. Yeah, so then what about questions? Like when you're interviewing somebody for your company, you have a favorite question you love to ask?
I always ask them because I'm always really keen to get to know them as a person. I also think when you're talking about yourself, you should be most comfortable because it's something you know. And most people in the interview are nervous because they're not sure, obviously, what the questions are going to be asked, how they're going to answer them. Hopefully they really want the job, etc. So I do always try and relax them to start with. So if I see something on their CV, depending where they live, went to school, something, I'll try and like start a conversation. And then I'll always sort of ask at some point in the interview process, if I asked somebody who knows you really well to describe you using just 3 words, what would you say? And that
Mm.
brings up some really like great answers in terms of they have to kind of do a bit of self-reflection, etc. And then I used to interview with a hiring manager, and his favorite interview question was, if I gave you an elephant and you weren't allowed to sell it or give it away, what would you do with it?
Okay. What's a good answer there? What are you looking for there?
See, I think again, it was a bit just to kind of like,
Throw
relax the
people off?
candidate, yeah, see, how they would respond to that. See, I suppose, yeah, what their answers were, etc.
Let me think about that for a second. What would I do? So I can't sell it or I can't give it away. So I'm going to, I mean, I got to think that, people here in Fort Lauderdale, Florida are going to want to see an elephant. So I've got to set up my backyard and get some elephant feed. And then I've got to start charging people to come pet the elephant. And that's probably how I guess that's the entrepreneur in me that is immediately thinking about how do I make money.
So we'll get people who would have said, I'll just keep it as a pet. And like, so you're probably not very entrepreneur-like, but caring. Brilliant.
Yeah.
And then,
Okay. Good. I like that. The other one is you asked about and I have a variation of the exact same question. I asked people, I have this thing up in my office and it was made for me on Boss's Day, like in 2018. And everybody in the company like kind of wrote a word professionally that was used to describe me. And so if you look on there, there's like, passionate, innovative, leadership, and then it has my name in the middle, right? So I always ask people in interviews, if we were going to make one of these for you, what 3 words would definitely be on here that describe you professionally? It's always interesting the words people choose, right? And where they go. Because a lot of times what I'm trying to figure out there is what is your perception of your professional identity, right? And how you come to work, right? And it's just interesting with the type of answers that you'll get. And a lot of times it can be very illuminating, sometimes not in a great way, but sometimes in a very, very positive way too. So I love asking that question. Now, how do you, when you're hiring, and congratulations going through great growth mode, and so it sounds like there's people coming in and you're interviewing and you're bringing people onto the team, how do you give them an idea of what it's like to work at HR Star? Like, how do you kind of convey through the interview experience, like what your employee value proposition is, why what kind of people want to work here?
Yeah. So we have in our team Katie, who kind of looks after that side of the business. So she'll do the initial screening call where she'll do, finding out about the candidate, etc. And then she will give a real sort of detailed overview of, what it's like working at HR Star. And she's an employee at HR Star, so she can do it from her perspective. She'll go through who's on the team, what roles they have, what kind of what they're like, the people, the team, etc. And then when we're going through the interview process, I'll be really open and honest around, what does a normal day look like? Well, it doesn't, but these are the types of projects you could be involved in. This is how we operate as a team in terms of how often we're in the office, how often we get together. I talk very openly about the fact it's fast paced and there's, high workloads. What does that mean? Well, you'll probably be looking after six clients, for instance, like leading on their people strategies, or you'll be looking after, employee relations, which could mean that you're dealing with a grievance one day, a redundancy next, etc. So I try and be, and this goes back to obviously what I keep harping on about, but really transparent and open and honest about what it's like. I think HR Star is a great place to work, but I also know it's not for the faint-hearted. It's hard work. Like, we have got a lot of clients. I always position ourselves that, we're really going to be immersed in your business and we're going to be really involved, which we are, but that obviously takes a lot of time. It means that we have to be really super involved and available to our clients, because that's the one thing in, HR recruitment, you never know when you're going to be needed. So you could have a plan and be like, we're working on your salary structures this week, and then all of a sudden there's an issue and we have to be all hands on, sorting out that issue. So I think it's just about being really open and honest. I'll be open about the development you'll receive, working then what our benefits are, et cetera, et cetera. So, and this just ties back into what we were saying earlier, I try and paint a very, very accurate picture of what it's like, rather than like, it's the best place ever. And you're basically going to be just like, sitting back, drinking the best
Puppy dogs and lollipops all day, right?
Yeah. So it's definitely not that, but yeah.
Yeah. Let me ask a question. Do you, and I ask this because I feel this, right? We go and we advise a lot of companies on how to be better at hiring, right? It's a big part of what we do in addition to helping them find great people. So I feel like a real sense of responsibility that our experience and the way that we're hiring, we don't get it 100% right. I want to be upfront about that with everybody right now. We don't get it 100% right. But I feel a responsibility of making sure that people are kind of looking at us with a little bit of a closer eye when they're going through our process. Do you feel that you have to, from an HR perspective, like, do you feel that added responsibility and weight of taking really good care of your employees and being very employee focused and first? Like, I imagine that's something that is across the board to a degree in terms of making sure you show up every day with that, because that's the expectation of the companies. That's what you sell.
100%. And it's such an interesting point because it's literally something I've been talking about sort of in my senior leadership team more and more. It's like we have to get better at HRing, HR staff, because we're so client focused. We're so focused on, yes, looking after teams, making sure they can deliver. But we are growing. We have the same growing pains as other people. And just like you say, like I'll put my hands, but I don't always get it right. I've hired some people who aren't very good. I haven't always done the best by my people in terms of HR, but we are putting a lot more emphasis on that because I have to practice what I preach and because I really do believe in it. But yeah, I do feel an enormous amount of responsibility to be like the best at looking after my people, because obviously it's what I do for others. I think it's like if you go to the hairdressers, you expect your hairdresser to have immaculate hair, like you just do, don't you? So yes, I definitely feel that pressure to be the best when it comes to how I look after my people.
Okay. Next time I'm in the UK, I'm coming to go visit and go watch Liverpool. We'll go commiserate over some wine and share that because it's an added responsibility. It's a good thing. I think again it goes back to that pressure, that really good pressure, but it's a great thing. But yes, it's absolutely an added responsibility. I find myself very underwhelmed by HR technology. Do you have any HR technology that stands out to you that you just love or that you highly recommend to customers or
Do you know what? And yeah, I get that. So we do use like different platforms, and mainly because we need to record like employee data. So we don't have obviously those days like when I started in HR of all the employee paper files. So it is obviously got to be stored electronically and securely, and that's great. And then we've got platforms that we've used for engagement surveys, etc. I still think there is a gap in the market in terms of a really good, accessible, affordable HR system that can do all of that for you. There are ones out there. But again, I think they're only probably as good as the information that you're putting in it and how much you are using it. So, for instance, if you've got a HR system to record all your employee data, but you're only like populating half the fields, then it's not going to tell you what you need it to tell you. So, I still think there needs to be a lot of input on that side so people can pull the data that they need from it. But yeah, I think there's probably more we can do in that space around tech, etc. in HR. But it's very people focused HR. But I think it's very much like we've already been talking about today. If we're wanting to rely on data more and more, how are we capturing that data, how we're recording it to make sure that it is going to be useful.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, the technology has to enable the human experience. It has to be platforms that help make things better from an intuition and human perspective, right? And supports us from an administrative perspective with the technology. And, organically here, maybe we have a channel partnership opportunity because it's something I've noticed for a long time. I've wanted to disrupt this space, particularly from a hiring perspective, and that's why we built our Aon software that we're leveraging with our clients right now, and we're getting a lot of great feedback. And so I'll have to give you a demo of that and show you that. But yeah, I mean, I just think there's a big gap out there. And like you said, I think there's a big gap there for an end-to-end solution. But what we focused on is the talent acquisition side on what we think can be better. And so that's something where we see there's a lot of opportunity for things to continue to evolve. So very excited about that. Let's take it a little bit of a different direction. I want to find out what you're working on right now, or maybe your customer you're working with right now that you're really excited about, that you're really juiced about. What's getting you out of bed in the morning?
So we've got a couple of new clients that we've onboarded in the last few weeks, and I always love working with new clients. I mean, I love my existing clients, but I love getting to know new people. So one of the things that we do when we start work with a new client, we go in and we do a people strategy session. So that's when we'll sit down with the business leaders and really sort of get into the weeds of, okay, talk to me about your business. Why are you in business? Talk to me about your journey so far. Talk to me about what you want to achieve, what that looks like. And then we'll dive into each area of that employee life cycle. Tell me what you do right now. What in an ideal world would you want it to look like? So I can really get to grips with what they currently do and what they want it to look like. And then we'll do some insights with the people in the business, and we go in and we'll start talking to as many people as we can. Like, talk to me about your role, how long have you worked here, what do you like about working here, what's the challenges, if you could change anything, what would it be on a scale of 1 to 10, with 1 being this is the worst job ever and 10 being it's the best. Where are you on that scale? What would make you higher, etc. It's just gathering all of that information to then put it into their people plan to really sort of say, right, over the next 12 months, we're going to look at doing all of this for you. This is how we're going to measure it. And this is where we're starting. So doing that initial piece where you're really getting to know the people, then the team will go off and they'll start working on their stuff. And then at the end of like Q1, looking at the progress we've made in that sort of small amount of time, and then getting that feedback from the client to say, oh my God, like this has been amazing. Like, I'm so glad we brought you in. I for me, don't get me wrong, I'm an entrepreneur, I'm in business, I want to make money, but getting really positive client feedback, really making a difference and impacting people in a positive way whilst they're at work is what gets me out of bed in the morning, what really drives me.
Totally agree with you. I love that. Knowing you're making an impact. Obviously, we're in business to make money and drive a profitable organization, but at the end of the day, it's that feedback, that impact that really, that's what juices me. That's what gets me going. So I love that you shared that. All right, I want to go through, we'll throw a little curveball at you here. We tend to go through an old LinkedIn post and we want to find out what you were thinking when you wrote this, okay? Now, I got to say, this, I think, is by far the highest engagement LinkedIn post we've ever done on the pod. So I'm going to read it to you. It's got 77,537 likes, 1,500 comments, 2,944 reposts. I also like to post on LinkedIn. I'm only missing you here by about 76,300 in terms of my best performing post ever. So I want to read this. This is about a year ago. Let's clear something up. Real flexible working is letting your team work from 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. if they're a morning person. Letting your team work 7 days a week if they got kids that take to football on Wednesday afternoon. Letting them work from where they feel they're most productive. Flexible working isn't about whether or not let your team work from home. It's about understanding that work isn't life. It's just a part of it. And the employers that get that get it. And the employers that don't. So I believe deeply everything you said here, and this is a great way to articulate that. I want to actually go about this in a different direction. When you wrote this, did you know that this was going to be a banger?
No.
Why do you think it resonated with so many people the way it did?
You know what? Because it's still a hot topic. So when I get asked to talk about, to clients, to potential clients at events, talk to me about, what's trending in HR, talk to me about what you're doing in the workplace. But something that will always come back is, and what are your thoughts on hybrid, flexible working? Because we obviously lived in a world where, let's be honest, not many people worked flexibly or hybrid. It was pretty much you went to work, and I'm talking about office style working, like you went in and you did your job in the workplace. Pandemic hits, everyone's like, oh my God, work from home. And it was a real massive shift, and everyone's like, oh, this is good. And everyone's like, oh, the office is dead. No one will ever go to work again. And then you do that for a while, and then the world starts opening up and people go out and about again to work. And then I think there's a real key benefit to having balance, to having an opportunity to have some kind of autonomy in how you work, because again, I think that links to how productive people are. I work hybrid. If I've got stuff that I just need to crack on with during the day, really get my head into it, I'll do it from home. And when I'm at home, it does mean that I can make sure that the washing's done, or I'm here to collect deliveries or walk the dog around the block at lunchtime or whatever. But I think if you're working, we've heard the rise of like high performing teams and people wanting to sort of, be high performing at work. Great. But we do need to make sure then you're equipping people with the environment and the skills, et cetera, to be able to do that. So I'm working with a client at the moment on an interim HRD project, HR director project. They've just made a shift from, they were doing a 3-2, so 3 in the office, 2 at home. They've just moved that to 4-1, so everyone has to come in 4 days. And the impact is massive that it's having. You're having some people who are saying, oh, I'm coming to the office every day, I like being in the office, that's fine. But others who have a lot going on in their personal lives, and it's impacted on school pickup or just on their study leave or just on the cost of commuting, etc. So I think that post hit and got the engagement that it did. And I probably could do another post similar to that and probably get maybe not quite as high numbers, but you'll always get a reaction because it's something people still want to talk about. And I think it's something people still want to talk about because nobody's got it really nailed, or no one really knows the answer, because the answer is different for everybody.
Exactly. I mean, it's really like when you're running a company, you have to make decisions for the republic. And if you have 100 people, 100 people are going to have different preferences and wants and desires. I think what you really hit the nail on the head with here, though, is that, and I've said this too, never articulated as beautifully as you did, but really coming down, flexibility, like what happens is it becomes like a one policy like conversation, right? And it's all about, do I get to work from home or not? Is it remote or not? And really, that's not what all flexibility is about. That is a microcosm of a bigger, more approach to your employee base on being flexible with them. To your point, like, hey, we need to get work done. When it gets done, I'm open to, as long as it's getting done, right? If it's in the office, if it's here, we believe there's value in coming to the office sometimes. We believe that there's value in working from home sometimes. And this is a policy that we think makes the most sense for the most amount of people. It comes down to, I need to leave and be home for dinner with my family. That's important to me. Or I want to wake up late. Like, we have a hybrid policy that's not just about the amount of days that we come into work, but the hours that you can come in, right? And so now we give a lot more autonomy there. To me, that's being flexible, right? We do believe that some office time is good and important and helps, right? But at the other end of the spectrum, you want to make sure that you're setting a policy, right? But being nuanced for each individual and what their circumstances are, right? And I think you can only do that with great management. So I love the fact that you put this out there. I think it's really, really well done. Did you have other posts that you thought were going to be as good or better and it didn't hit? It's just kind of funny how some things get caught up in the zeitgeist and some don't, right?
And I think that's probably like maybe the third or fourth post I've done about flexible working. I know this would be, hit a little bit, okay, get a few comments, but when I remember that going out and seeing like the levels of engagement, and I was like, wow, like I've spoke about this stuff before, but I don't know whether it's timing and I hit it at the right time. But yeah, I've definitely had other posts where I talked about potential like employee engagement and the link between that and business success. And you think, come on, guys, surely more people would engage in this, and then they don't. So it's you just don't know, do you?
You never know. And listen, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create a breakout video for this podcast. You're going to share it. I'm going to share it. The engagement's going to be 90,000. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be your new best performing post. I cannot wait for that. Here is the last question I got for you, okay?
Okay.
If you had to offer, now we talked about young 20-year-old Kelly early in her career, that first interview that she went on, okay? If you had to offer young Kelly a bit of career advice that you know now that you didn't know then, what would you just offer to, in general, early in career talent, advice that you know?
I would say nobody's an overnight success, however much, people try and sort of portray that they are, they're not. I think you have to work hard to be successful. And I think people should be willing to work hard. I think back in my early career, I showed up, I worked really hard, I put the effort in. Once I decided I wanted to be in HR, I did the hours, etc. And then I got recognized for it and I got promoted and I progressed, etc. When I did my CIPD, I did that whilst I was working full time with young children. I worked really, really hard and I reap the rewards now. But I still work hard. Obviously, I'm still working hard. I just think not everybody, not all young people, but I think there is a perception that things can come easy. And I think sometimes they do. But on the majority of the time, you've got to work really hard if you want to be successful. So don't be scared to work hard.
Let me compound on that real quick. So I am about 90% of the way through the Walter Isaacson biography on Elon Musk. And listen, Elon's got his issues just like anybody. But reading it, one of the things that really stood out to me was, okay, like I understand why this is the richest person on the planet and why they've had the success they've had, because his appetite for risk is unlike anybody I've ever seen. Most entrepreneurs are trying to mitigate risk and hedge. He does not. He's very hard on people, okay? Very hard on people. I wouldn't want that to be my brand, but he's very hard on people to push them beyond things that they've ever thought possible to achieve. He's gotten into spaces that he had a advantage in terms of knowledge of whether it be engineering background or he really wanted to change the world, and has a really great mindset in the way he thinks. So I'm looking at all this and I'm saying, okay, like, how to be successful, the pathway is there. We all know what it is. We all know what it comes down to. The question now becomes, are you willing to give up the things that you need to give up? Because it sounds like his relationships in his life are not great. It doesn't sound like he has a lot of free time or even cares to have a lot of free time. He's sleeping on the floor of his office from the get-go. He's put himself in positions where he could have been bankrupt multiple times. He's burned a bunch of bridges. And he's had a lot of success because he was willing to do all those things. And so ultimately, at the end of the day, success, the path to success is not a mystery. We all know what it is. It's just a matter of whether you're willing to do these things or not. And I think that's a really important thing. I will say this, and if I'm missing anybody, let me know, but I think that the most successful people, a good part of why they're successful is because their identity is tied to their work. It's not something that they have to force themselves to do. It's not, they wake up in the morning, whether they're an influencer on YouTube or whether they are a professional athlete or a musician, they have given their life to the vocation, and that's a big part of who they are. And that's why they've had that success. I don't know anybody who's half in on anything that has had tremendous success. It just does not work that way. Now, that's not for everybody. Like, some people want to be known as, I want to be the person that has the greatest garden on the planet, or I want to be known as somebody that is the best mother and father, or best brother or sister, or whatever it may be. And that is more than okay. But I also think that it's not a mystery on why the successful people are successful, and it's because they're willing to do things others are not. And so you just have to make that decision. Do I want to do that or not? Then don't complain about the outcome though, right? Because if you don't want to do it, that's okay. But then you can't say, well, why am I not a multimillionaire? Or why am I not, having the type of professional success I want? It's because you weren't willing to give up what you needed to ultimately be successful. Now, maybe that's a very simplistic way to look at it, but that's reading that book. That's what that said to me. And to your point, there's no way to get where you want to go without putting in the work and without sacrificing. It's just not possible. And that's for anything. Great relationships, great, great professional success, great anything. You've got to be willing to put in the time, be intentional, and sacrifice. You agree?
100% agree with that. 100%. Yeah. So, if people look at me now, and for a while I had a bit of sort of imposter syndrome, a bit of, when people are like, oh, you've got a nice house, you've got a nice car, you've got nice holidays. And I'm like, yeah, I do all these things because I work really hard and have done for years. Like you don't see when, the hours that I'm working and the sacrifices I've made over the years to get to where I am today. So yeah, but I continue working hard. So yeah, I 100% agree with your point.
I love it, Kelly. I really enjoyed our time together. I cannot wait for this podcast to come out. Where do people, if they want to find you, where can they find you?
Yeah, so you can find me on LinkedIn, Kelly Tucker, also my website, which is hr-star.co.uk, Instagram, etc. But yeah, mainly LinkedIn and my website.
Wishing you continued growth. Thank you so much for coming on. Namaste. Have a great day.
I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for listening to Higher Learning with me, Rashid. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode.